Holy Gospel according to Mark, the first chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As soon as Jesus and the disciples left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening, at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So we are still pretty early on in the liturgical year. In our gospel readings, we're in the first chapter of Mark. In Mark 1, Jesus has been busy. He's been baptized by John, he's been tempted in the wilderness, he's called some disciples, he's cast out some demons, and now he's healing people. All this in just 25 verses. Okay, remember a couple weeks ago when I told you that Mark is spare in his details and just gives you the basic facts, which is how he manages to cram all of that in just 25 verses. Because the first 9 verses describe what's happening before Jesus even shows up. Mark moves at a breakneck pace with everything happening immediately, and yet Mark is still able to paint a picture. He's trying to establish who Jesus is and what Jesus has come to do, and the fact that we get this many healings so early on in Jesus' ministry means something. Jesus, Mark tells us, is not just a teacher or a preacher or a prophet. He is a healer, a restorer, a compassionate leader who seeks reconciliation. The healing of Simon's mother is brief in the text. The entire encounter is covered in 3 verses. It's brief in the text, but even in its brevity, it has a lot to say. There are a couple words here that stick out to me as I read it. First, it says that Jesus lifted her up. This is the same word in the Greek that will later be used to describe how Jesus was raised from the dead. So we have resurrection undertones happening here. Secondly, it said that after she was healed, she began to serve. And the word here is the same word that is the root for deacon, a position in the church defined and shaped by service in the world. And so at its surface, it's this simple healing. There's a fever, Jesus takes care of it, and Simon's mother goes back to living her life. But if we look deeper, this healing is more than just curing a physical ailment. She is lifted up and then immediately moves to service. She's been raised to serve. She's been raised for a purpose. Could that be true of all who come to Christ for healing, that they are raised for a purpose? Could that be true of us? We know that illness can come in so many forms. Of course, the obvious is the physical. Our bodies, even despite our most intense efforts, will all eventually decay and shut down. And there are acute things like injuries, infections, heart attacks. There are slower moving culprits like silent, undetectable cancer or encroaching dementia. There are mental illnesses, both those that are clinically diagnosed by psychologists and those that might not reach that level but cause distress nonetheless. And our spirits may be in need of healing, beaten down by guilt or shame or just plain exhaustion from the experience of being human. Last week, maybe you saw this story. The Sesame Street character Elmo posted a question on his social media accounts. Do you see this story?
Yeah.
He wrote, Elmo is just checking in. How is everybody doing? And at first, the responses were pretty innocuous. I'm good, Elmo. Hope you are too. Going to the store to buy groceries. Simple, sort of silly things that you might say to a puppet's Instagram account. These are, I think, what they kind of expected. But then it almost seems like a dam broke. It seems like people felt they could be vulnerable with this fuzzy red monster from a neighborhood that they visited in their childhood. And the answers got real. Some were still celebrations about jobs or life milestones, but there were more, many more, that were honest about the struggle so many of us feel. Elmo's question, how is everybody doing, got answers that I don't think the folks at Sesame Workshop expected. So tired, I struggle to get out of bed. Could be better. I lost my partner 85 days ago. I am lost without him. I'm feeling really unanchored, like I'm floating in the wind with no direction or control. I wish I could say okay. It's been really rough. Each time, Elmo responded with a thoughtful or caring comment, and when needed, a link to further resources in support. This post and its accompanying comments served to illustrate that so many of us are struggling. So many of us are in need of healing in all its forms. We are not alone in this. So many of us are experiencing similar struggles. Yes, I would wager to bet that all of us in some way are in need of healing. For the physical or the mental or the spiritual or some other dimension that I'm not even considering. And that healing can arrive in just as many varied forms as the illness itself. There is, of course, the healing medicine, that has been discovered and developed and supported by science. Medicine, clinical therapies, changes in diet, or physical activity, these are strategies and tools. They are gifts from God in and of themselves. God working through and in our society to find ways of providing relief. But we know that there are other kinds of healing that we need. We cannot fix a broken relationship by taking a pill. We can't stave off loneliness by eating a more balanced diet. We cannot increase our capacity for compassion and grace by following a scheduled protocol. And that is when we need God. It is God who forgives us, who enables us to forgive others, who allows us to accept forgiveness from others. It is God who brings together communities of faith and empowers them to support one another through the highs and the lows of life, who helps us create a space that is open to varied personalities and ideas and backgrounds, but is protected from bigotry and further oppression of the most vulnerable. It is God who sees how overwhelmed we are by the world's deep need and buoys us in our small efforts of impact. It is God who provides that wholeness of healing that sets us up to serve, not unlike Simon's mother. Not in a mercenary way, like God is just healing us so that we can be shipped out to the front lines of mission, but in a beautiful, freeing way. Like all that has kept us from being more fully engaged in service has been that thing within us in need of healing. I wonder a bit if this sounds too simple, too naive. Because we know that healing in whatever form is required is not simple. On the contrary, it is often very difficult to experience and takes time and stages. It's not an easy flip of the switch. And yet we trust. We trust that God will provide it because God has promised to provide it. And we trust that God will heal us for service, even if it's not quite all the way at once. Even if it happens in fits and starts, even if it's more of a cycle of healing rather than a straightforward line. And it is in that vein that we serve. Not as perfect, finished products, but as ever-healing disciples raised up to care for the world. Martin Luther wrote, "A Christian is a perfectly free Lord of all, subject to none. A Christian is a perfectly dutiful servant of all, subject to all." Odds are, if you've attended a Lutheran church for any length of time, you may have heard that quote before, particularly in a sermon, but it bears repeating, and so I'm going to say it one more time. A Christian is a perfectly free Lord of all, subject to none. A Christian is a perfectly dutiful servant of all, subject to all. In other words, God does not demand service as a price for the healing that God so lovingly bestows. Instead, caring for our neighbors and the creation around us is a blessing, a gift, an honor that we are enabled to do because God has cared for us first. Like illness, like healing, that service itself has so many shapes to it. Small acts like giving food to a local food pantry, volunteering at a cold weather shelter, or even just pushing back against hateful or hurtful rhetoric spoken by another. Bigger acts like organizing a clothing drive, providing a weekly meal, or supporting conversations around difficult topics of injustice. And large-scale efforts like advocating for policy changes that better the lives of the underrepresented, or demonstrations for peace. Service looks like that, and it looks like so many other things that God has called the faithful to do, caring for one another, just as and because God cared for us first. To paraphrase Elmo, how are you? How are you? Allow yourself to move past the brushing aside, the I'm fines. Allow yourself to reflect on the places in your life that are in need of healing. I have mine. I'm sure that you have yours. Trust that God knows where you are hurting. God knows the healing that you need, and God will provide. God will lift you up and inspire you to serve.